Factorio is an early access game that is launching on Steam today. The developers sent me a preview key for the game, so footage for this video is from the new Steam build. However, I already played the game over a year ago and loved it. In total, I'd say I've put about 100 hours into Factorio, about 30 of which were on this most recent build. This video will be more of a recommendation/review rather than an examination, which I might do when the final version of the game is released. The developers estimate that Factorio should be feature complete by the end of this year. Factorio is one of those genre-defying games that's hard to understand without playing yourself. Even trailers for this game have this air of impenetrable complexity to them that matches the pollution you'll be generating while you play. Even Don't Starve, the game that I think is the closest to this one in how it plays, isn't that good of a comparison. It also has that same quality that Infinifactory has, where it's more about thinking about your own solutions to challenges rather than just solving ready-made puzzles. Since the primary purpose of this video is to answer the question, should I play this game? Then I can do so already for a significant amount of people watching by going through the first 30 minutes of gameplay. You're a lone engineer stranded on an alien world. You have nothing but your knowledge and capability to make tools to set up a base on the planet. This starts off as simply as chopping down some trees, making your first pickaxe, and mining some ore and coal. So far this may sound really familiar to a lot of other games, especially Minecraft, but bear with me a second. Two of the first structures you'll build are a furnace and a burner drill. Both are powered by coal or wood. The drill will mine ore and coal for you, spitting out each chunk from a chute that you can collect by putting a wooden crate at the output port. The furnace, once again powered by coal, will smelt the raw ore you collect into something you can use to make new items, more drills, more tools. Most new players will then go on to set a little cluster of drills and furnaces at each of the major resource fields that they have: coal, iron, stone, and copper. Things then change when you set up your first steam engine. You pump water through some coal-powered boilers to get the turbines moving and the massive engine you've built out of the first pile of resources that you've mined from the planet. You set up power lines with wood and copper, and now you have electric drills that you don't need to babysit with coal deposits to keep them running. You can put down conveyor belts and place robotic claws to both insert and remove materials from the furnaces. The endpoint of this first gameplay cycle being the establishment of a coal line to your boilers so that the steam engine is being powered forever by itself. There are dozens of different items to make in this game with these systems. Already I know that many people watching this will be thinking like this as they go through it all, and will now shut this video off and go play the game themselves. It's what convinced me to play the game even though I usually avoid unfinished titles, because of that genre defiance I mentioned earlier. The game has this unique hook of how it handles its production chains, but also the early moment of empowerment when you get these raw materials smelting on their own. You were just running around like a madman making sure the burner drills and furnaces were all going for what amounts to only a few scraps of usable metal. Now you'll be swimming in it all and won't have to lift a finger. I know there will be another group of people who won't be interested, and that's understandable. No game can appeal to everyone. For those undecided, I'll go into more detail on the game's mid-game complexity. But first I want to show the official trailer for the game. It shows a monster of a factory that's so dense that I worry many people who watch it don't realize that it's something that players can build themselves. Never mind the fact that I've never felt it necessary to make something as tightly interwoven as what's shown here. But the fundamental idea still holds true. Even having played it so much, I look at the factory in this trailer with something close to awestruck horror. How could someone make that? Yet it's possible because of how the first 30 minutes I went through sets the standard for your entire playthrough. Every goal in the game is compartmentalized, and it leads to some of the most satisfying moments I've ever had in these types of simulation/management games. You'll make sprawling monstrosities of your own as you play, it's unavoidable, but you'll do it in such a hyper-focused haze that you won't realize how complex a beast you've constructed until after you're finished. When you scroll the zoom level back and see how multiple factories now link together, you'll wonder how it looks like it got out of control when all you were doing was placing one tile down at a time. Progress through the game is tied with a list of research goals. You need to build science centers, and the game uses this as a great way of introducing factory blocks. The first research resource you'll make are red vials. You have to make these yourself by hand and put them into the science centers to start research. You can't make factories yet until you unlock the capability to do so through researching automation. So the game forces you to put materials together before you can place a factory, to once again reinforce the idea that this is a game about making the game do things for you. This will be the first fully fledged production chain you'll construct, to both make the two resources needed for the red vials, and then to carry the finished products to the science centers to have the claws insert them into generating research points for you. It's like the electricity thing all over again. This is the beginning of the second most substantial part of the game. You could say the first phase until this point has been getting yourself established. From here on, it's about large-scale automation. The second tier of research goals require the more complicated green vials that need a larger factory system to make, then the third tier of blue vials, which will likely be the first wall of difficulty that players will hit. You need 4 inputs, each of which require several previous steps to make, that will have you tapping into more resources and pumping oil for the first time. There are alien enemies in the game that will attack your factories if you produce too much pollution. Even if you somehow manage to keep this level low, they'll eventually attack anyway. Another side of the game is balancing defense and setting up walls and turrets to keep the aliens out. The third and final phase of the game is when you reach the technology needed to go on the offensive to kill the alien nests and start clearing space for new resources. This is necessary for the final tier of research that will take you to Factorio's flawed endgame. I'm going to split the video here. This marks the end of the review section. I'm going to talk about some of the flaws Factorio has and make some suggestions on what could improve the game. Before I do, I want to say that I highly recommend that you try the game's demo if what I've said so far has caught your interest. For the main game, I suggest playing with the alien set to peaceful mode your first time. I'd also say that you should respawn the map until you get a starting area that only has a few trees instead of a giant forest, since clearing it all is a lot of work even with the shotgun later on. Factorio's biggest flaw is also its most obvious one. The game isn't finished. I've read a good policy on early access games. Only buy them if you'd be happy with the level of content available right then and not on some promise of future updates. For me, Factorio fits that advice, but that doesn't mean the game couldn't be better. Complexity in the early and mid game is just about perfect. Toward the end, however, things become more about tedium rather than creative problem solving. The amount of research files needed to unlock the last 20 or so techs is beyond excessive, and encourages leaving the game running while you go off and do something else instead. This could be argued as a way to encourage expansion and to constantly be making more factories to make this go faster, but this has its own set of problems in that it's not really worth the trouble. Trains are one of the coolest features in the game, and I've never felt like I needed to make them. Conveyor belts are cheap to make, and since the rate the drills spew out ore is constant, it doesn't really matter how long it takes for those raw materials to reach your main base once the flow of them is established. It's a lot less hassle to just set up these belt routes rather than make room for trains and put down all the necessary infrastructure. The aliens don't help this, since if you play with them on aggressive, walls and turret lines are mandatory in order to not get overwhelmed. Enemies spawn incredibly quickly, so you have no choice but to set up these boundaries, which once again discourages expansion efforts. Going from turrets that require ammunition to only needing electricity to fire does help with this, however. The final goal in the game continues this trend of massive resource requirements. You're trying to launch a rocket armed with a satellite into orbit. The endgame feels like a grind in order to stretch out the game in its unfinished state, which I can understand, but I don't think it's strictly necessary. An expanded endgame with some creative surprises could cap off a great experience and make it a phenomenal one. The suggestions on Factorio's own website are interesting enough. Seen here: space platforms, another level of operations to run; alien interaction, adding choices to the local aliens; RTS elements, creating a central base to issue orders or making controllable units; underground building, again another level to build on and set up production chains; and a food industry, likely another tech tree, more factories, different resources. These ideas are all great, but a few of them seem outside of the scope of the main game. The developers have been good about adding things, although they aren't as frequent about it as I'd like. From when I played the game before, the game's polish has been the most noticeable change, but they also added the tank, which is a fantastic tool for bridging the gap of power you previously needed to kill aliens for resources. Before that, you needed to carry turrets to place down to kill them for you, which was as awkward as it is ridiculous. I can't see space platforms being added, or done well enough to be a worthy inclusion. The most interesting choice here are the underground layers, which taps into the same space that Dwarf Fortress does, but also doesn't seem realistic to be added considering the scope of patches so far. Alien interaction and RTS elements sound like great tweaks, but I don't think they'd add enough depth in the way that the endgame is currently lacking it. Basically, the only two mega projects you can achieve right now are making your set of power armor and upgrading it, and making the rocket that ends the game. Other projects like this could function in the same way that other upgrades do, making your life easier by removing some of the more grindy buildings and adding variety. Giant power facilities, both in generation and storage. An oversized drill that is expensive to make but can tap into a set resource deep underground without having it be present on the surface. A power emitter that covers a wide area that makes it so you don't need to put up power lines in its influence. Research projects could be about combining functionality in the endgame. This ties into some missing variety as you climb up the tech tree. An example being that I find it odd that there are only two types of drills when mining resources is such a fundamental part of the game. The upgrade cards you can make help add some choices on how your factories function, but I found these to be boring compared to unlocking new types of buildings. Drills that run hotter than the usual type but also look different. Combinations could be drills and smelters built in together as one structure, or factories that come pre-packaged with an output claw. Little ideas like that, which can cut down on space and time later in the game, appeal to me because they give steady drips of the progression you had early on. As for a larger idea of the endgame, I think that a food industry is the way to go. The rocket silo goal would be something that permanently pacifies the local alien population, or maybe it could be a dampening field that severely limits their ability to respawn. A different tech path could open to set up different kinds of more complicated production chains. One of my favorite RTS games is Total Annihilation. It was unique at the time for having a streaming economy, streaming in a way that you're watching this video right now. This meant that areas on the map that you took were immediately useful. The more land you had, the more metal deposits you could put extractors on, which streamed more to your grand total. Land was power in that game. I think this idea of taking land as resources could be used here, maybe even different ones that are only located in different biomes on the map. The goal here would be to encourage use of that great train system, having to create a vast network of different resources from all over the game world, spreading out sources of materials farther apart, but you can use them indefinitely once you do acquire them. I think it could be an interesting change to the game's core formula after you reach the end of the content currently in the game. For a game about automation, the final goal could also be creating a clone of yourself from the biological materials and research you've done while making the food. Creating another version of yourself, who could then go on to presumably colonize another planet, would be like adding a cycle to the game. It could tie back to how you ended up starting out at the beginning yourself. Either way, my armchair developer ideas aside, Factorio is already a brilliant game. It's earned itself a place amongst other great management titles that can make me stunned by how much time has passed since I started playing. You can slip so easily into a loop of completing a chain, into starting another, which bleeds into the next project. I highly recommend it.